Hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's community meeting for the Tremont Columbus Bus Lanes Phase 2 project. My name is Reagan Checchio, and I'm going to be serving as the moderator for tonight's meeting. Next slide. I would like to note that all MBTA activities, including public meetings, are free of discrimination. The MBTA complies with all federal and state civil rights requirements preventing discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, limited English proficiency, and additional protected characteristics. We welcome diversity from across our entire service area. If you have any questions or concerns, please visit mbta.com/Title VI. That's TITLEVI to reach the Office of Diversity and Civil Rights. Next slide. I also want to remind everyone of the rules for participating in this meeting, as well as remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded. We hope that we've designed an online public meeting that will be interactive and provide an opportunity for us to have a conversation together. But before we begin that conversation, I do want to review a few technical aspects of the Zoom platform. Next slide. We have interpreters tonight who are translating the meeting into Spanish, Haitian Creole, and Mandarin. If you require these services, please click the interpretation button on your screen, that's the globe icon, and select which language you wish to hear. At this moment, I will ask all English language speakers, including myself, to select English as their chosen language. This will allow you to hear translated non-English comments during the Q&A. Next slide. You can view closed captions by clicking the closed captions feature and selecting from the options shown. Show subtitle will display a caption at the bottom of the screen. View full transcript will display the meeting's audio transcription in a window to the right. Next slide. So all attendees are muted during the presentation to prevent excessive background noise. And if you're viewing this meeting on a computer, you can toggle speaker view to see the presentation more prominently. If you're on a smartphone, you swipe to change the views. So with regard to Q&A, there will be a presentation tonight followed by Q&A. You may use the Q&A button to submit a typed question or comment at any point during the meeting, but we would ask you to hold raising your hand until the Q&A portion of the meeting. We are going to be monitoring the Q&A during the presentation, but still ask that you hold any substantive comments or questions until later in the meeting. That said, if you are having a technical problem, please share your issue in that feature at any point in the meeting, and we will respond as quickly as we can. The questions you submit are not visible to attendees once submitted, and we're going to try to get to as many as possible later during Q&A. And now, finally, I would like to introduce Philip Cherry from the MBTA, who will begin the main presentation. Philip.
Thanks so much, Reagan. And thank you for all of you for taking time out of your evenings tonight to talk about this exciting project. We appreciate your attendance and just really want to set the stage that there will be a lot of technical information presented tonight. We're trying to break that down into sort of bite-sized components for you and then give plenty of time at the end for question and answer. But we also want to set the stage that tonight is really the beginning of the next, really a 4 to 5 week period of additional feedback on our draft concept design. So you may have friends or neighbors who could not attend tonight's meeting, and maybe they can't also attend the Wednesday open house at Roxbury Community College at 3:30. But this presentation will be recorded. The materials from this presentation will be posted. And there will be an online feedback form that we're really pushing folks to respond to. We'll be out in the community at MBTA stations in the coming week. So just really wanted to set the stage there on that for everybody. As Reagan mentioned, my name is Philip Cherry. I'm a project manager with the MBTA who is managing this project for us. We also have staff from our consultant teams, of whom Reagan was a part. We also have our design engineering team, WSP, in attendance as well to hear questions tonight. And then we have Maya Mudgall from the City of Boston, who I will introduce at the end of this slide. I'm going to go through just briefly what we'll be going over tonight. Brief presentation of the overview, background, goals, the need for this project, and the design approach, and then a pretty lengthy in-depth discussion of the draft concept design and summary, some discussion of the trade-offs that we considered through this process, and then certainly time for your question and answers, and then next steps. So with that, I'll hand it to the next slide and Maya to cover the overview.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maya. I'm a transit planner at the Boston Transportation Department, coordinating on the city side for this exciting project. First, to set the stage, I'd like to share with you where this project is happening. This project continues off of the work we did on phase 1 in Eggleston Square on Columbus Ave. So this extends the corridor up Columbus Avenue from Jackson Square Station up to Roxbury Crossing Station, and then continues where the street transitions into Tremont Street all the way up to Ruggles Station. There are some small improvements planned on the side streets connecting to this corridor. So at Roxbury Crossing Station, it will extend onto that portion of Tremont Street a bit, and then at Ruggles Station onto Ruggles Street as well. Next slide, please. We have some project goals listed here. I'll read them out. This project aims to prioritize transit, support active transportation, and safety for all road users. We want to center the needs of the people who live, work, and gather here along this project area, and support the residential, educational, and institutional access, as well as access for emergency medical services. This is a partnership between the City of Boston and the MBTA. The MBTA owns the vehicles that are operating here. They decide routes and schedules. The City of Boston owns the street. So this is really a joint effort between our two institutions to make this project a reality. In terms of city background, this project has come out of our long-term transportation planning vision called Go Boston 2030. This project area is also unfortunately on our city's high crash network, meaning that there are high incidences of vehicle crashes along this stretch, which is why safety is such a big priority for us on this project. In terms of MBTA history, this has come out of the Better Bus Project and the recent bus network redesign, which aims to look at the MBTA's bus network and look at how we can make it work better for all users of the service. In terms of responsibility, like I mentioned, the City of Boston owns the streets, the traffic signals, and decides how the curbs are managed and used. The MBTA owns the vehicles, so in this case, the buses. They own the platforms and stations. They decide fare, and also all MBTA operators are hired by the system. DCR is the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and they actually own the Southwest Corridor Path, which mirrors a lot of this, this area. And as many of you may have used it, it travels along the length of this corridor. Next slide, please. Here is our project timeline. It's quite a long timeline. As I mentioned, this project comes from a long history of planning and studies done by both the City of Boston and the MBTA. But where we are now is in the spring of 2023. We are in our outreach phase. We came to the public in the fall and winter of 2022 to get a feel for the community's wants and needs and where things can be better. And now in 2023, we are back with a concept design. This has gone through several stages of review through both city and MBTA design experts. And now we're here to bring that to the community, both through this virtual public meeting and our open house that will be happening on Wednesday at the Roxbury Community College. And we're also doing outreach through our online feedback form for folks who aren't able to make either of these meetings. Next slide, please. So since we last saw you in the fall, we've been quite busy. Our engineering team has been conducting traffic analysis and other types of technical analysis to create this concept design. We have been engaging with stakeholders all along the project area. There are a lot of institutions in this area, so we've been working with them to make sure that we know what their needs are for this corridor and how we can best accommodate that and work with that in our design. We have been talking to the agencies that work along this corridor, both within the city and outside of the city. We have been talking to folks along the corridor. We had a pop-up event at the Islamic Society. We've been present at different stations around the area, and we've just been trying to get the word out about this project so that people can get involved as early as possible. And like I mentioned, we've been doing a review within the city and MBTA so we can refine this concept before we brought it, so we can have the best concept possible to bring forth to the public. Next slide, please. And now I'm going to hand it back to Philip.
Thanks, Maya. This is information that some of you may have seen if you were with us in the fall, but we think it's worth repeating for those who may be new joining us. Maya's touched on this a little bit, but when we think about the need for this project, it really centers around safety and the strong transit network and ridership that we see, which I'll touch a little bit on the next slide. And then Maya also mentioned the number of community institutions along this corridor. There's the community college, there's the Whittier Health Center, Madison Park High School, Northeastern University is nearby, and then there's several playgrounds that abut the DCR Southwest corridor. So a lot of reasons to make this more accessible and safer for everyone. As we look to the next slide here, there's several figures that will touch on that. Go ahead and go to the next slide. The left three of these infographics really speak to the safety need. You see 140 crashes over 4 years, and those crashes are driven in large part by the number of lanes on this corridor, 6 to 7 lanes, which results in a lot of speeding. And unfortunately, more speeding typically correlates with more crashes and, unfortunately, often more severe crashes. The right three of these infographics really speaks to the strong transit demand in this corridor. On the several bus routes that operate in this area, there's over 10,000 riders a day, even now in the pandemic, post-pandemic. And on those routes that serve those 10,000, another 40,000 riders are riding elsewhere along those bus routes. And in fact, as recently as last week, with the data the MBTA receives each week, the 3 highest bus routes in terms of ridership in the entire MBTA system all operate along this 1 mile of street that we're looking at here. If we go to the next slide, we can see some more information about delays for this corridor. I know this may look a little bit complicated, but I'll try to break it down. If we look, this is representing on the top the travel time for buses from Jackson Square to Ruggles, and on the bottom from Ruggles to Jackson Square. You can think of the blue bars as the time in minutes that it takes the bus to travel that. And blue represents a relatively sort of delay-free period. As you look at the orange and then gray, those represent successively higher periods of delay and congestion. So what this results is that at some times of day, you have a very predictable 4 to 5 minute ride between Ruggles and Jackson Square. But at other times of day, that trip may take twice as long due to other congestion and curb conflicts and just overall sort of chaos on the street. That 5 minutes may be enough time to make an Orange Line train connection. It may be enough time to make sure you pick your child up from daycare on time, enough time to make sure you get to work, or even pick up coffee before work. So this is just one example for one specific route in one area. We've done analyses on many more of these routes that would take all evening to go through with you, but this is just kind of highlighting some of the delays that these buses face. As we go to the next slide, this is just a brief slide about the MBTA's bus network redesign. What I really want to hit home here, yes, there's a lot of routes, there's a lot of bus routes today, and there will be in the future. This street has the highest concentration of bus routes in the entire MBTA network. And so it's very critical that we're serving those routes efficiently and with minimal delay to the 10,000 passengers who are on these routes. I also want to highlight, you see the yellow arrow pointing to the light blue Route 22. We're really excited about a proposed route change from bus network redesign. Currently, the 22 extends all the way up to Ruggles. And if you want to go towards the Longwood Medical area, you have to transfer And this route will provide a 1-seat ride. And we'll touch on that right at the end of this presentation, but that is a big change that we think provides a lot of benefits. If we go to the next slide. And lastly, this has been described by many and maybe even some of you as an unwelcoming street. It's, like we said, 6 to 7 lanes wide. It's a very high-speed road. It's often been described as a place that you travel through, but it's not really somewhere that you want to linger along. And given that there's a nice greenway, there's playgrounds, there's a college, there's a high school nearby, we're really trying to work with our partners and others, stakeholders here to create a street that is far more welcoming, in addition to being safer, that really reconnects the Mission Hill and Fort Hill neighborhoods, and you don't have this big dividing almost highway in the middle. Next slide. A brief summary of what we've heard. The left and right comments are what maybe even some of you provided to us back in the fall. And then in the middle is actually a more recent comment from our pop-up outreach at the Islamic Center. But a lot of these comments focused on safety. But like you can see there at the Islamic Center, some were also focused on more green space and providing a safe buffer for those who walk along the sidewalk. For those interested in more of this feedback, we have it posted through the project website. You can also watch the old recordings that have more of this information. I believe our December 12th recording would have more details of this. But just a refresher that we have already conducted feedback here at multiple events and have engaged maybe even many of you on receiving your feedback. Next slide, please. Before we launch into the design, we have a few slides that sort of bridge the gap between the project need, which is what we just went over, all the safety and ridership issues, and then the actual design itself. So as we look at the next slide, unsurprisingly, we've sort of grouped these into transit priority, safety, and then greenery and public space. There's many other elements that we will definitely affirm to you that are covered here, but we'll go to the next slide and just cover each of these in a few brief periods to kind of set the stage for what's being included. So looking at transit priority, we're going to talk about this both generically as well as how it applies to this corridor. The MBTA, in partnership with not only the city of Boston, but several other cities and towns throughout Greater Boston, have implemented several transit priority designs, whether those are bus lanes or other traffic signal or curbside elements. And through each of those, we've seen significant improvements in the transit travel time and reliability. For this project, that would be those buses that really connect the neighborhoods of Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan with what some might call sort of Boston's core, looking at Back Bay and downtown. You get to Ruggles or Roxbury Crossing or Jackson Square stations, you can get on the Orange Line, you can get on the commuter rail for many routes at Ruggles Station, and then you can really get all over the region from there. We also want to emphasize, this is a common question. People ask about emergency vehicles. If you're taking a lane that was formerly used for general traffic and it's now more exclusively for buses, what happens to EMS vehicles? The great thing is those vehicles are allowed to use these bus lanes, and we've received positive feedback from those EMS services that they're able to use these streets more effectively. And then there's fewer general traffic bus conflicts. I know we've all been on a street where you have deliveries and pickup and drop-offs and Uber and Lyft and buses and general traffic, and everybody's trying to find their lane or their space, and there's really nothing for anybody. And these designs really try to sort of carve out specific spaces for each user so that there's less conflict and confusion and chaos. Moving to the bottom of the screen here, the center bus lane benefits. There were some questions about this, and this is covered on the next slide as well. Above and beyond curb or side running transit, there's fewer double parking and delivery conflicts, providing an even faster and more reliable service. It also often creates greater space for passenger platforms and amenities, which we'll go over. We've seen from our own studies that Maya's going to present in a bit, and also those around the nation, that they have proven travel time and reliability benefits for transit riders. And then it also provides, in this case, continuity with the phase 1 center bus lane south of Jackson Square. So those That's about a 0.7 mile segment. This would extend that to be about 1.7 miles of continuous bus lanes, which provide additional benefits there. Looking at the next slide, many of you are familiar with the bus lanes between roughly Walnut Ave and Jackson Square. These were implemented in October of 2021. I think many of you, the first thing that stands out is the red paint, obviously. But we want to touch on some elements of this project that we often get questions about, and that sometimes maybe we're sort of distracted by how bold the red paint is, that we lose sight of some of the other elements. So if you can click again, Nate, I think the first and foremost is the enhanced shelters and platforms. There's a significant shelter. Several people can stand or sit underneath it, protects you from obviously the rain, the weather. There's real-time arrival signs, which is really helpful to know when your next bus is coming. These signs can also provide information about other MBTA alerts and even the weather. And then there's other cameras and security features that we find effective. If you click again though here, you see the two white rectangles, one at the top left and one sort of in the bottom center of your screen. The top left was an additional crossing that was implemented. This is a traffic controlled crossing with a compliant median refuge island. And I want to take a minute. Many of you and others we've talked to have commented about the fact that some segments of Columbus Ave had a median and it's no longer there, and you enjoyed having that median to cross. But what we want to emphasize is that median was not usable by anybody in a mobility device. It was hard for parents with strollers, hard for someone who maybe can't scale that, like small children or the elderly. These added crossings, which weren't there before, are signalized, and they provide code compliant refuge between raised concrete that's safer than crossing, and it directs drivers to a specific location. The white rectangle at the bottom center highlights a rebuilt crosswalk with new curb ramps that are compliant, and you also see a significant amount of rebuilt sidewalk in that area. So these are the types of elements that you'll see in a few minutes when we're talking about our project, and we just wanted to really convey that those wouldn't be overlooked here. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to hand it over to Maya to talk some about some of the findings from our phase 1, and then some other design elements from the project.
Thanks, Philip. So as part of our implementation of phase 1 that you just saw, we conducted an analysis to see how it was actually impacting buses and general traffic. We found that during rush hour, so during the heaviest traffic points in the day, the current Columbus Ave bus lanes are saving bus riders about 3 to 4 minutes each trip. And that's in one direction. So if you're taking a round trip, that's about 7 minutes per day that you get back. So like Philip mentioned earlier, that's 7 minutes in which you could make a connection to an Orange Line train. You could make it on time to an appointment, or you could grab some coffee in the morning. So that's really significant because, again, this is only 0.7 miles of bus lane that's currently on the ground. Next slide, please. We also looked at the impacts on traffic. So after the Columbus Ave bus lanes were built, we found that to travel that 0.7 miles of the project area, it took drivers about 20 to 40 more seconds. So that's 20 at off-peak times and 40 seconds at peak traffic. This is driving that stretch of Columbus Avenue on average. And we also found that after the bus lanes were implemented, about 10% more vehicles were obeying the speed limit. This is the citywide speed limit of 25 miles an hour. That means that the street is safer for all road users, regardless of how you travel when cars are obeying the speed limit. Next slide, please. We also heard feedback from both bus riders and bus operators, really positive feedback from operators. They enjoy having space so the bus can be in its own lane. They don't have to worry about weaving in and out of traffic. You can always pull up to the curb and make sure that people, regardless of their ability, can successfully get on and off the bus. We also heard really good feedback from bus riders. The bus is a lot more reliable when the center running bus lanes were put in. It's a lot more efficient. And with real-time arrival signs, you know when your bus is coming. There's more significant shelter. we've just heard in general, it's a much more pleasant experience to ride the bus along this area where the center running bus lanes are. Next slide, please. So talking about some of the improvements that were included on phase 1 and are planned for phase 2, we have a lot of pedestrian and bicycle safety improvements. These are things like shorter crossings. I know many of you have probably crossed at Roxbury Crossing. I live right there and I cross it almost every day. And that is a very long crossing. Even if you are able-bodied, if you're young and strong, it's not a lot of time to get across quite a far distance. So we would like to shorten existing crossings and make them easier for folks to cross regardless of your ability. We would like to add new pedestrian crossings. We see there are a lot of areas along the project corridor where people are already crossing without a crosswalk, and that's not a safe condition. So we see where there's a need for crossings and we'd like to add them there and make them safer for folks who are already using them. We mentioned the Southwest Corridor runs parallel to our project area, and we know that there are a lot of pedestrians and cyclists using the Southwest Corridor, and those crossings can be quite tricky now. They're a bit narrow, and that puts people who are moving on wheels and people who are moving on their feet close together, and that can be a little bit of a chaotic experience. So we'd like to widen those crossings and give everyone more space to move. We'd like to make safer intersections, so that involves things like bumping out the curb and some making those turning movements a bit tighter so people have to slow down and be more aware of their surroundings, and other traffic calming measures to just slow cars down. We've seen some really, really high speeds on Columbus Avenue, and that's not safe for anyone. So if we can just calm traffic down, we make the road safer for everybody. Next slide, please. We'd also like to include green infrastructure and general public realm improvements to phase 2 of this project. We know that in order to reach the city's climate goals, we're really going to need to focus on things like green infrastructure. So this involves things like rain gardens to collect stormwater and prevent flooding. This involves more trees to provide shade and general cooling effects and air quality improvements. And this involves making spaces where people can gather. Like Philip mentioned, right now with the high speeds and wide roadway, it's not a very pleasant area to gather. It can feel quite intimidating to be in this space. But we know that with the Southwest Corridor and all of the institutions that bring people to Columbus and Tremont, this is a place where people are frequently and would like to be. So we'd like to make it more pleasant to be there. Through things like green infrastructure and public art and improvements like that. Also, these have the added bonus of buffering people from cars. There's that sidewalk on Columbus Avenue right across from Roxbury Community College. As someone who walks there every day, it feels intimidating to walk on that sidewalk because you're so close to traffic. So we are thinking of including buffers in areas like that to just separate pedestrians from cars. And like I mentioned, more greenery for an overall cooling effect because this is an area that does experience the urban heat island effect. Next slide. And back to you, Philip, for the concept design.
Thanks so much, Maya, and thanks for everybody's patience as we move towards what I'm sure many of you are interested in hearing. I'm going to give a brief summary of the elements that this concept design includes, and then you have just one more slide, I think, till we get there. So, Nate, if you could advance what this includes as a draft concept design. Again, this is draft. We are very much seeking your feedback at some refined locations. You know, metaphorically, I think in December we were sort of at the 30,000 foot level. I would say now we can see the runway, but we still need some guidance from you that we can touch on later and may come up in Q&A. But wanted to highlight what this project is proposed to include as far as center running bus lanes, new center platform pairs with shelters and enhanced platforms at Roxbury Crossing, travel time savings, several improvements related to pedestrian crossings and improving the Southwest Corridor as it crosses side streets, public realm and green infrastructure, and then also a suite of more sort of what some might say standard infrastructure of new and or upgraded traffic signals with improved coordination, which is sort of how the signals talk to each other and are timed to be safe and efficient. roadway repaving, and then sidewalk repairs and improvements. So I know the top bullets sort of get a lot of our focus in this, partly because they're new and different to a lot of our projects, but we've also received feedback about issues with the signals and bumpy pavement and potholes and sidewalk issues, and wanted to emphasize that those would also be part of this project as well. Next slide, please. Before I get into the weeds of each of these 3 slides and the details, I wanted to just set the stage. Again, this is going to be a decent amount of information that we present. We've split this into thirds. So there's a sort of southern, middle, and northern segment, and we'll be moving from south to north. For each of those slides, I will be going through the same types of design elements, if you will, in the same order. That's as much to help me go through everything I want to say as it is to help you sort of follow along, as there is quite a bit of information here. So I appreciate everybody's patience as I speak through this, and for my occasional tea break here as I keep my throat dry or moistened. Go ahead and make the first click here, Nate. The first piece of this that I want to focus on that's very exciting from a transit perspective, and for many of you, is currently Jackson Square busway is oriented to be southbound on both legs, if you will. So if you are a bus coming from the south along Columbus, or any bus actually, you have to make a very circuitous 5 intersection movement to get through here. It's very loop to loop. We have some more information on this in a later slide as part of our discussion, but we were trying to look at how to improve that. And so if you click again, Nate, one of the big changes we're proposing to make is making Jackson Square busway have 2-way operations. We think that this in and of itself is going to save bus riders on the 22 and the 38, 41, 3 to 5 minutes during peak periods alone. There's a lot of engineering and technical components to this, and this impacts the adjacent intersections and busway in a variety of ways. But for those who ride the bus, or who may, have ridden it a couple of times and realized that it's quite circuitous in this area, this is going to greatly increase the efficiency of transit operations, not just at Jackson Square, but along the entirety of the route that these buses serve, which is really important to try to hammer home, is it's not just a localized improvement for these bus services. I'll also point to the orange arrow on the right top of your screen. That's just signifying the center running bus lanes in that area. You may notice kind of in the middle block there, bus lanes as well. On the southbound side, or kind of the top of the street, it's actually on the side, and that's so buses can enter the busway there at Jackson Square Station, and we would use traffic signals to get those buses from the center to the side. You click again, Nate. You see 4 numbered boxes, hopefully on your screen here. Each of these corresponds to various pedestrian improvements. We're going to start with number 1 at the top left-ish at Lamartine Street, where it intersects Center. We've received a significant amount of feedback, both from many of you, as well as our partners at the city and MBTA respective sort of technical departments, about the opportunity potentially to improve this. A lot of cyclists come down the southwest corridor, and then they sort of abruptly come across this intersection. And so we're looking at ways to improve that. There's also a separate city project looking at the Mildred Haley Apartments, and a separate MBTA project also looking at Jackson Square. So we're trying to leverage all of these together. And I think really your feedback specifically, we welcome your feedback along the entire project, but I'm going to make a few notes of where we specifically would like your feedback. And along Center Street between Columbus and Lamartine, there's a lot of competing interests. There's pickup drop-off activity for the station. There's some folks who want wider sidewalks. There's potential transit priority. There's a lot of traffic in this area. So we welcome your feedback along Center Street in particular. If we move to box number 2, that's at the intersection of Columbus at Center/Ritchie Street. We will be looking to improve accessibility at this location by reconstructing and rebuilding the curb ramps here to be more compliant. and really looking how we can just improve the safety of that crossing, especially given that there's some opportunities with traffic signaling and turn lanes to do so. Moving to sort of the center right of the screen where you see number 3, Columbus at Heath Street. There's a number of opportunities here that we see to improve both bicycle and pedestrian safety. For pedestrian safety, we would be looking to add median refuge islands on either the north and south crosswalks to really break up that long crossing and improve both the safety and comfort of those crossing. And then at the top of that box towards where it says Heath Street, we would be looking to rebuild the existing Southwest Corridor crossing. For those of you who are familiar with that, it funnels cyclists and pedestrians into a really narrow, non-compliant single ramp. We would be looking to build a wider, likely a single ramp due to some engineering constraints, but one that is easily, 10 to 15 feet wide to accommodate more safely, more cyclists and pedestrians at the same time, really trying to minimize the number of conflicts between pedestrians and cyclists. That's been a big point of feedback from you as well as our stakeholders that we've heard about here. And then looking at number 4, you see that box to the right of your screen, as well as an image below of a raised crosswalk. For those of you who aren't familiar, a raised crosswalk keeps essentially, you can walk across from sidewalk to sidewalk across the street. You stay at essentially the same level as the pedestrian and vehicles have to ramp up and down. We see New Heath Street as an opportunity for a raised crosswalk as a candidate there, and received feedback actually back in the fall as well as from the city of Boston. Clicking ahead. Next, back one if you're able to. There you go. You see 3 green arrows, one kind of in the center of your screen that is along Columbus Avenue between the busway and Heath Street, as well as one along the top of your screen from Heath Street towards the right. Both of those would be additional buffers of green infrastructure, essentially pushing the curb towards the center of the street, and you're providing additional space between the sidewalk and the travel lanes. And we've received consistent feedback that this will take a minute to explain, but there's a lot of folks who feel like there's too many people on the path portion of the Southwest Corridor. And we think that's in part because the sidewalk isn't very safe to walk along. It's a fairly narrow sidewalk, and there's no buffer between you on the sidewalk and 6 lanes of high-speed traffic. So if we can sort of stitch, if you will, some green space, you get a lot of winds, you get greenery for stormwater runoff, you get some heat island effects from a climate resilience perspective, and it makes the sidewalk a lot more welcoming and appealing to walk there, which takes people away from the path, sort of separating higher speed cyclists and scooters from slower speed pedestrians and joggers. So I know that was a mouthful for me to say and for you to hear, but there's a lot of cascading benefits from looking at that. And then if you look at the arrow kind of on the bottom of your screen where it crosses by the RCC parking in New Heath, that is us sort of conveying that we have been in close discussion with Roxbury Community College and are exploring ways to leverage this project with some interests they have to make that side of the street more welcoming for everybody. Clicking again. This is looking at the existing, or the Columbus Avenue at Center Ritchie intersection. We received feedback, and our analysis indicated that maintaining traffic capacity at this intersection was fairly critical, at least on a comparative basis to some of the other intersections. So there's very strong left turn movements from that Center Street intersection to travel north towards the heart of Boston. And we've elected to maintain that capacity, as well as largely the same cross section of the street between Center Street and the busway. So you're able to maintain essentially the same number of vehicles turning north. And then after that, that's when the bus lanes begin. But we see some queuing and traffic operations benefits from that. And you see at the bottom text box, just reiterating the other infrastructure improvements of signals and curb ramps, sidewalks, and even lighting along this corridor. Nate, you can go on to the next slide at this point. excuse me. This is the next segment. So the middle segment, if you will, it starts just where the other one left off to the south. So it covers Cedar Street and Roxbury Crossing with Tremont Street and Malcolm X Boulevard. So if you want to click, Nate, we should see again some orange arrows, and starting from left to right, really in the middle of the screen, you see again the center bus lanes continuing throughout all of this segment of the corridor, providing benefits for routes like the 22 and to the south, and the 15, the 23 to the north. You see at Cedar Street, 2 center median platforms. These would be very similar to what you see on the phase 1 portion of this project, but we do want to note there's several lessons learned in terms of the design of the platforms, how to better protect the platforms from errant vehicles and mitigate crashes, and how to better protect buses from drivers who may be making errant movements. These platforms are located at the same location as existing bus stops, so they're not new bus stops. They're just enhanced platforms that would reflect many of the elements that Maya and I discussed with you a few minutes ago. And then if you look to the sort of top right by the Roxbury Crossing Station, you see 2 platforms there. Those are existing bus stops again, but we would be looking to enhance those, hopefully providing shelters, assuming the bridge can accommodate, but looking to really make those both more welcoming for passengers and also providing some additional transit priority space. That as a whole, the Roxbury Crossing intersection is one that we'll cover a little bit more in depth later in this presentation. There's a lot of competing interests there and a lot of different high frequency bus routes that stop there. So allocating space for those buses may actually improve traffic operations by, pun intended, giving everybody their own lane to some degree. Nate, if you want to click again. So again, we have our friends, the numbered boxes for pedestrian improvements. Starting at number 1, this would be looking at, again, reducing the crossing distance across Cedar Street. This intersection in particular was long a part of Boston's high crash network for pedestrians and vehicles. It's a very wide crossing with very high speeds in the middle of sort of a straightaway where folks, I think, try to drive as fast as possible, and the data shows that. We've recorded speeds as high as 75 miles an hour in the vicinity of Cedar Street. So looking to narrow those lanes and provide refuge for pedestrians. And then again, as you see sort of at the top of that box, rebuilding the Southwest Corridor crossing to make it wider, improve capacity for cyclists and pedestrians at this location. Moving to box number 2, just right of center, you see a brand new crossing across Columbus Avenue. This was driven by a number of comments as well as observations. If you go out to Roxbury Crossing for any period of time, you see folks darting across traffic, in large part because there's a strong desire line from the Orange Line station to Roxbury Crossing. And frankly, the existing intersection at Roxbury Crossing has very long crossings that don't provide a lot of safety as well. So we have been in close discussions with the city of Boston and Roxbury Community College about where to place this, but also really welcome your feedback of where along Columbus Street you feel like this would best serve folks. Maybe, as you give your feedback, think about where it would be best with respect to the Roxbury Crossing Community College buildings. I'm going to skip ahead to number 4, actually, because it's a similar new crosswalk that's being proposed. This one is right at the Orange Line station where it exits and crosses Tremont Street, sort of right at the eastern bank, if you're familiar with that new pathway there. Again, somewhere where we've received a lot of feedback. The data shows there's safety issues, and if you stand there for any period of time, you can see with your own eyes the number of folks who are crossing. They're essentially avoiding a roughly 600-foot walk around to either Terrace Gurney Street or Tremont Columbus to get from one side of the street to the other, entering or exiting the Orange Line. So both of these intersections require a lot of technical expertise and finesse from a signal timing perspective, and it's something that we will certainly continue looking at. But both of these intersections, number 2 and number 4, have received a lot of feedback from constituents, from even elected officials as to how to improve this. And then jumping back to number 3, we've spent a lot of time looking at how to improve pedestrian safety at the Roxbury Crossing main intersection. I know whenever I cross it, it feels like I'm kind of taking my life into my hands. Even if I see that white walk sign, it's just a very long, intimidating crossing. So we're looking at a number of different intersection elements, including bump outs, reducing the number of lanes and median refuge islands to protect everybody as they cross. Nate, if you want to click again, we'll be talking about other direction. There we go. Green infrastructure. This is very similar to what we talked about on the previous slide. Looking at places where we can stitch additional buffer between the sidewalk along the southwest corridor and the travel lanes to make it more welcoming, to make it safer, to provide climate resiliency in terms of flooding and runoff, and reduce the heat island effect. So that's what the arrows on sort of the top or the west side, if you're directionally inclined, speak to. The long arrow on the bottom along Roxbury Community College is just, again, affirming our continued correspondence with them to leverage this project, to see how we can explore options together. And then you see 2 circles, if you will, diagonally at Roxbury Crossing. There's opportunities here to certainly improve the Roxbury Crossing Plaza. A lot of demand and competing uses there. I'm sure many of you have been to the farmers market. There's a lot of different cyclists and pedestrians and scooters passing through here. There's pickups and drop-offs. There's the Orange Line. There's bus activity. Really working to see how we can make this a better functioning, more welcoming plaza. And then we're also in discussions with Roxbury Community College, depending on how the design moves forward, if there's additional space in front of the Reggie Lewis Center, how that could be improved to some degree if there's more space. Clicking again, we will now look at some of the general infrastructure improvements. One thing that is very important for you all to be aware of is at Cedar Street, we are proposing for Cedar Street to be one way. It is currently a 2-way street for vehicles. So it would be proposed to be one way from Terrace Street towards Columbus, that is eastbound. And with that, there would be no southbound right turns, and no northbound left turns, and no westbound through movements. We will cover this a little bit more on a future slide where it's zoomed in a little bit, but there's a number of bicycle, pedestrian, and transit platform design related improvements that this fosters, which I promise we will cover a little bit later. And then if you look to the right, the black rectangle at Roxbury Crossing, we have done our very best to maintain as much traffic capacity as we can at this intersection without sacrificing the safety and some of our transit priority goals. There's again a ton of competing uses at this location where you have extremely high bus volumes, you have significant pedestrian volumes, whether they're going to the community college, to and from the high school, to and from the Islamic Center, especially during religious holidays, and other uses along this corridor. So balancing those takes a lot of trips to the drawing board. We've made a lot of those trips already, but we are very much here asking for your specific feedback of what you think is important at this intersection. With that, we can move to the next and third of our 3 slides here. So this one again starts just where the other one left off, north of Roxbury Crossing, and goes towards Melnea Cass Boulevard. The title of that street is chopped off with the way we've shown this, but it is the rightmost, right in the bottom right corner of your intersection here. So we see Prentice, New Vernon, Ruggles Whittier, and Ruggles streets here. If you want to click again, Nate, to show the transit elements. Starting on the left side, you see another platform pair at Prentice Street. This would be really effective in serving the Whittier Street Health Center and providing enhanced transit service to a really critical community health center. If you look again in the center of your screen, just conveying that these center running bus lanes would continue up to the Ruggles Whittier Street intersection. And then that red arrow kind of just left of the legend is just signifying Ruggles Station, which is one of our highest volume bus bus stations in terms of routes and activity. And so trying to get our buses to that station was really critical. One change that I'll hit on a little bit more throughout the next few slides is, if you remember from our December meeting, we had transit priority elements extending north of the Ruggles-Whittier intersection. We have trimmed those back to as you see them now for this draft concept. That's for a number of reasons based on bus routes, based on feedback from many of you, as well as our key stakeholders, and the analysis, which just shows how critical that Ruggles movement is, especially the two left turns turning out of Ruggles eastbound towards Tremont and then up to Melnea for regional connectivity. You can click again, Nate. Looking at the pedestrian and cyclist improvements, one thing I want to highlight is at number 1, and really between 1, 2, and 3, you see those two platforms. We've received internal feedback as well as some from our constituents about these center platforms. And at some locations where we have the opportunity, we'd like to make them long enough to have 2 distinct access points. So you see at number 1, you would actually in the southbound direction, you would exit the bus. And if you were, say, going somewhere to the north, maybe to the health center, you would exit right at the Prentice Street intersection. But if you were continuing south on foot, you could actually exit at a signalized crossing at number 1, where you see there, and head towards Roxbury Crossing or other places further south. So we also have the same between 2 and 3. You see that long sort of yellow area between kind of the health center and that New Vernon Street. That would be essentially a longer extension of the platform connecting those 2 locations, which is very similar to some of our Green Line stations that you may be familiar with, where you have a stop in the middle between 2 intersections and can access either one. There would be additional improvements looking at number 2 of reducing the number of lanes, making it safer and easier to cross. This is critical, especially for those with mobility needs, senior citizens, and anyone really accessing a health center. Some of you may have even seen earlier today, the mayor and Boston's chief of streets announced several improvements to signal timing and access. And they really hit home on the improvements near health centers. So we're trying to latch onto that. At New Vernon Street, this is actually a brand new street, which I'll touch on, but we're trying to improve the pedestrian crossings. There's going to be a new development, a separate project through the BPDA, the Boston Planning and Development Authority. At this location, it's a very large development. And for those of you familiar with this area who are used to seeing essentially a vacant lot for the last several years and decades, if you can fast forward and imagine in 5 years, there's going to be a very large development with housing, with office, with lab space. And so we're trying to proactively plan for safe pedestrian access, crossing Tremont Street at this location and thinking ahead to how folks get from the Southwest Corridor to here, and especially Ruggles Station to here. So that intersection, number 3, was developed with that thought in mind. At location number 4, at Ruggles Street, Whittier Street, I mentioned that we're trying to preserve as much vehicular capacity as we can based on those high volumes, but we're also trying to think ahead to improve pedestrian safety. So we've looked at reducing crossing distances, maintaining median refuge, and providing what we call curb extensions, or maybe you've heard them as bump outs, to reduce that distance where possible. And then again, looking at number 5, similar to our first slide, first of these 3 slides, that's another opportunity for a raised crossing there at Ruggles Street that we've heard both from our technical partners as well as some of you that you would like to see more raised crossings. If you want to click again, Nate. Looking along the P3 development, we don't necessarily own that space, but there is an opportunity to partner with that developer to activate it, to make it a much more welcoming part of the public realm, make it somewhere where really people want to be. If you look at that circle right under the word crossing in the center of your screen, that is kind of an open area, a plaza at Boston Police Headquarters. There have been some initial conversations with the police about this project, or through another means, activating some of that space, converting it from hardscape, a heat island with poor stormwater drainage, into something that's a little bit more welcoming. That is still somewhat to be determined, but again, this is an area in which we'd love your feedback as we continue those conversations with the police. And then the arrow to the right is again an area of additional potential green infrastructure. Clicking one more time, Nate, you see three additional black boxes focus more on the general traffic or other infrastructure. At number 1, I want to emphasize this would be a location where we are proposing to make Prentice Street one-way westbound away from Tremont. The benefits of this are it allows us to have enough space to have a bike lane in either direction. So you have a bike lane in the direction of travel with vehicles, and then you have a bike lane in the opposite direction. We call that sometimes a contraflow bike lane. There's a number of other benefits at this location with respect to how you can size the intersection, really keep it small and tight, making it safer for pedestrians with shorter crossing distances. This is something that we've had initial and ongoing conversations with the Boston Police. Some of you are aware of their parking there in that lot. Looking at number 2, I think I've already touched on this, trying to maintain as much vehicular capacity as we can at this intersection for several critical movements. We've performed a number of traffic analyses here and are continuing to evaluate. But again, this is an area where we really welcome your feedback. And then I touched on the fact that at number 3, we have, this is the Melnea Cass intersection. Previously in December, if you remember our previous presentation, we had extended the transit priority lanes, the bus lanes, up to this location. We have trimmed those back to Ruggles, which allows more space for general traffic as they approach that critical intersection. So I think that was the last click for these 3 slides. I'm going to take another quick drink of tea here and kind of touch on a few more of the elements specifically. I do appreciate your patience. I know this is a lot to walk through, but hopefully you understand the amount of work that we've been putting into this and that we do still genuinely want your feedback. You can go ahead and click ahead, Nate. The next few slides are going to break down what I just went over. So there's going to be a little bit of redundancy, but a lot of instances of additional detail. This is focused on the transit infrastructure and travel time. Really the highlights: 1 mile of center running bus lane, 2 new center platform pairs with enhanced shelters. These would be at Cedar Street and Prentice Street. Enhanced platforms at Roxbury Crossing, as we went over. And then the projected travel time savings. We've broken this out based on our bus routes. So there's not a continuous route from Jackson Square to Ruggles in the bus network redesign. There's routes that go from Jackson Square to Roxbury Crossing, where we project 5 to 7 minutes of peak hour travel time savings, and then from Roxbury Crossing to Ruggles, 3 to 4 minutes of peak hour travel time savings. If there was a route that went the whole way, you can do the math. That's roughly 8 to 11 minutes there of total travel time. But they're in the future network, there would not be a continuous route that entire mile. If you go to the next slide, I know this is something that many of you are probably interested in, is what are the vehicular traffic impacts? Hopefully we've been able to convey that this is something that has been really top of mind for us. Certainly the project goals for this project are safety, transit, public realm, green infrastructure, but we have not ignored the impacts on drivers. There's safety impacts for drivers, and we understand there's strong regional desire lines and connectivity needs in this area. So I've highlighted 3 of the intersections in particular where we've tried to maintain as much capacity as possible, and really specifically as many turn lanes as possible. So you see to the left at Center Street, we maintain those 2 eastbound left turn lanes from Center to go north on Columbus, as well as the southbound right turn lane and the southbound left turn lane. At Ruggles Whittier Street, similarly, the 2 eastbound left turn lanes and the northbound left and the southbound right lane. And then at Melnea Cass Boulevard, there's very few changes to that intersection overall. There currently is a 3rd southbound through lane, but the overall capacity at this intersection should be very similar. We've performed a number of analyses because this is still a draft concept design. we will provide those results once we have finalized this, but based on the analysis of phase one and those impacts and our preliminary analyses that led to this, which were extensive, we're projecting, during peak periods up to a 2 to 4 minute travel time impact. Again, we will come back to you once those are finalized. Your feedback here on how that's finalized is really why we're here tonight, why we're out with you on Wednesday, and why we're collecting additional feedback. But we know this is an interest for many of you. Looking at the next slide, bicycle and pedestrian safety, just kind of the highlights. 3 new pedestrian crossings, most of them in the vicinity of Roxbury Crossing. 4 upgraded Southwest Corridor crossings. An approximate 25% reduction in crossing distance across these intersections. So, some may be 10%, some may be 30 or 40%, but on average, you're walking 25% fewer feet. So at some of these, that's going from 80 feet to roughly 60-ish feet. At some of it's going from 100 feet to 75 feet. So that's a significant distance. And that reduction also has other benefits that are probably too technical to explain, but that reduction also benefits drivers through the way that traffic signal timing works. And then we're also looking at those raised side street crossings. Next slide, please. Public realm and infrastructure, or green infrastructure. We talked about Roxbury Crossing. As you saw the draft concept today, there's approximately 0.5 miles of green infrastructure. We've been coordinating very closely with Roxbury Community College and DCR, as well as other key stakeholders along the corridor. And then there are other potential plaza improvement opportunities as we've discussed. Next slide, please. And then finally, not to overlook these, there are potentially 8 new traffic signals or traffic signal upgrades as part of this project. There's roadway repaving, sidewalk repairs, lighting, and utility relocations as needed. So I know a lot of this is concentrated on the bus elements, the pedestrian and bike safety, green infrastructure, but to make all of those other elements happen, you have to have kind of the foundational infrastructure to make that work. And you see very poor pavement at Roxbury Crossing on the left. You go back, and then on the right, you see non-compliant curb ramps and water ponding because of poor drainage. So that's just a couple of examples of things that will be improved as part of this project. Moving ahead, I know you guys probably want to give feedback, and I promise we are very, very close. But I'm trying to address here. We're trying to address some requests that many of you had at our last meeting in December. You wanted to hear about some of the alternatives that we considered and the design trade-offs through this. Trying to be as transparent as we can about what we've considered on this project. I'm highlighting a few of these here, but we're happy obviously to talk through more as you have questions. And so one of these that I touched on briefly was the Jackson Square stop location. This red line shows the circuitousness of those buses going through the station. So if you come from the south right now, you go north through Center Street, you take a left at the busway, a bus picks up and drops off passengers. It takes another left back onto Center Street, and it takes another left back onto Columbus, and then it goes through the busway intersection. So you have 5 opportunities where you're waiting at a traffic signal, and that's to say nothing of other congestion or delays. And so we evaluated, should we put those stops, the platforms, right on Columbus Avenue? That would be the straightest shot for vehicles coming from Columbus, continuing north. But what that does is if you're transferring from the bus to the train or vice versa, you have a long walk, which is actually uphill if you know Jackson Square Station. You might be making that walk in 95-degree heat or in 15 degrees in snow. And so through additional analysis, we decided to keep all the buses routing through Jackson Square Station. But, and I'll be brief as you go to the next slide, Nate, this kind of highlights how much more direct in light blue here bus travel would be. So you're avoiding 3 left turn movements, and you're avoiding 2 additional signalized intersections that you go through. It's going to be significant improvement. So this occupied a lot of our focus and technical discussion. Next slide looks at Cedar Street. We've talked about how we're proposing to convert it to one-way operations from 2-way. There's a number of different considerations here, whether it's the room for bicycle facilities. You see the two-way bicycle lanes at the top of your screen. We realize the impacts that converting to one-way operation has on vehicular movements. These vehicles would be routed through either Heath Street to Terrace and Parker in that neighborhood, or up at Roxbury Crossing through Terrace Street. And we've been in communication with the Terrace Parker study that the City of Boston is leading, and will continue to be in discussions with them. But making this one way in this direction allows for us to shrink this intersection a little bit more, which makes it safer, and it allows us to have some other elements here, which again address the project goals that we've been looking at. Next slide. Roxbury Crossing platform location. So I've mentioned the number of buses that pass through Roxbury Crossing. Right now, there's 3 high-frequency routes that pass through this on Tremont Street, and in the future, there will be 4 buses that pass through this location, 4 routes. So as you go to the next slide, this helps with the visual. You will see on the right is an option that we had considered. It would be center platforms for those buses passing through. That does improve transit travel time and could have some pedestrian benefits. But what it potentially would have meant is that there would have been one-way vehicular travel through this intersection. And we felt that, after analyzing this and looking at the impacts, looking at the number of EMS vehicles that pass through this area, we really needed two-way operation for buses and general traffic. So what you see on the left is the draft proposed design that you've seen in front of you. Next slide, please. And finally, 3 more slides before you get to ask some questions. We appreciate your patience. These 3 slides are are hypothetical individuals. There may be real people whose lives align with these, but we're really trying to present who we think this could benefit and serve, and sort of who we had in mind when we were thinking about some of these design decisions. So Sylvia is a hypothetical person who lives along Columbus Avenue near Eggleston Square, and she works near the Longwood Medical area. Right now, she doesn't own a car, so right now she takes the 22 all the way to Ruggles, where she has to transfer to the 8 or the 47 to go to the LMA. Along that route, she's sitting in delays, she's transferring, there's a lot of waiting involved. In the future, as part of this project and bus network redesign, she gets on the 22 in Eggleston Square. She goes north through transit priority all the way up to Roxbury Crossing, and then she takes a left, stays on that bus, and gets to the LMA. There's a significant travel time improvement by not transferring, and through the improvements offered by phases 1 and 2 of this project. So a great example, I know we touched on the Route 22 changes. There's several benefits for that connectivity of the Roxbury Jamaica Plain area to the huge employment hub, the great medical campus at Longwood, a lot of huge jobs and medical center. And we've also heard from Roxbury Community College. They have students who actually intern and take sort of apprenticeships at the LMA. The Route 22 would benefit them as well. Looking at the next slide is another example with, I believe his name is Tim here as we go forward. Tim needs a mobility device and often travels between Nubian Station and Ruggles Station. With these improvements, he's going to be able to do that more reliably on the bus, but he's also going to have better safety improvements that if he's interested in enrolling himself there, it's safer and he feels more confident doing that through this project. So that's another example, hypothetical, but I'm sure there's folks who are doing this. And then on the last slide, we have David, I believe. And David is actually based off of a real case study that we've heard through this project. We've heard through our discussions with the Boston Housing Authority that there are senior citizens who live just off of Terrace Street. They have a roughly 600 to 700 foot walk to the Reggie Lewis Center, crossing this large intersection. And they exercise multiple times a week at Reggie Lewis, but they don't feel comfortable crossing this large intersection. So they actually have a senior focused ride share essentially pick them up and drive them not even a 1/10 of a mile hardly to get to this location. And with this David is our hypothetical individual. He feels safer doing this. It cuts down on the number of cars on the road, and really more importantly, it empowers these folks to feel confident that they can have this access to a great community opportunity like the Reggie Lewis Center. This is the last technical slide. We've tried to hammer home that this is really the beginning of this next phase of feedback. You can provide feedback, obviously, in just a minute on this call. You can come, if you would like, to our open house on Wednesday at 3:30 to 5:30 at Roxbury Community College. And you can also, we're really strongly encouraging you to provide feedback on our online forum. We're going to be promoting this through a number of different online and in-person channels coming up, and we hope to, obtain a number of comments. Kyle from our project team here has just put the link for that in our chat. So if you would like to provide feedback, we strongly encourage you to do so. I know I assume some of you are sort of overwhelmed with the amount of information that we've presented here. You do not have to provide this feedback tonight. In that form, you can ask us questions and we will get back to you, and you can you have 4 weeks essentially from today to ask those questions. So don't feel like you have to provide the feedback tonight. We will also be hosting this presentation and this recording, as well as a view of the overall draft concept design that you're able to move and scroll through. So that should be easier for you to kind of make notes and consider different things, maybe in a format that's easier than me speaking for several minutes here, I realize. So I think I'm handing over to Reagan for just a bit to go through the mechanics of providing feedback.
Yes, but before we open the comment and questions segment to the public, I would like to invite any elected officials in attendance or their staff to ask questions or make comments. So if they want to raise their hand, we can recognize and unmute them. So if you're not an elected official, I would ask you that you lower your hand until we hear from the electeds. Any elected officials want to speak? All right. So then Nate, actually, if you could go to the next slide. So thank you so much. So if you do want to share a comment or question, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And I'm going to alternate between reading questions and comments that have already been submitted. We have a few in the queue already, and asking folks verbally to share. If you are going to make a remark verbally, we ask that you take no more than 90 seconds for your question. We want to hear from as many people as possible. I think we have about 45 people in the meeting still tonight. For verbal Q&A, you can press the raise hand button. And if you are joining on the phone, you can raise your hand by pressing star and the number 9. If you speak Spanish, Haitian Creole, or Mandarin, please raise your hand to provide your comments verbally for the interpreters to hear and repeat them. When we recognize your name, you're going to be unmuted and you may speak. And then after you share your comment, we're going to lower your hand and then you're going to be returned to the muted state. So with that, I'm going to go through some of the questions that have been in the queue because people have been waiting for some time. There was questions from Linda. There's sort of 2 questions. One, I think you may have touched on already in the presentation, Philip, about how this impacts the BPD headquarters on emergency response calls. And then also relating to the southbound on Tremont Street, looking at the number 1 box near Prentice Street, feeling that there might be necessary for overflow police parking. So sort of a 2-part question about the BPD, if you could respond to that.
Sure. Nate, why don't you navigate back towards slides that were going over this? We can maybe helpful to have a visual for some folks, both for this and other questions. In general, I think your first question, Linda, spot on as far as the or Reagan, I think, alluding to the emergency vehicles are allowed to use the bus lanes. It's very likely that we'll also be allowing Boston school buses to use the bus lanes. There may be some some specific locations where that's not the case, but this corridor, as Maya alluded to, is very unique in that there's not a lot of residential housing right along the corridors, which affects BPS pickup drop off. I know your question was about EMS, but we get kind of both those questions together. But yes, EMS services are allowed to use the bus lane. It actually provides them a faster and more reliable travel time. They're not you're not sort of having to part the seas of vehicles for them to make their way through. So there is a big benefit, I think, and we've received positive feedback from EMS services about the bus lanes and their travel time reliability. I believe your next question was about southbound at Tremont near Prentice Street. We are showing, we are showing some parking along Tremont Street there, and that would be allocated for police. We know police park in this area now. We also want to convey that we have engaged in some conversations with the police about potentially studying how they can sort of optimize the capacity of their existing lot at that location. We know, we've heard from folks about potential parking in the neighborhoods from police vehicles, and that is somewhat beyond the scope of this project, but we also want to do our best to accommodate parking in this area. So we're closely working with the police and with BPDA with respect to the P3 development for how to accommodate their parking needs. If there is additional feedback from the police that they need to access Tremont Street from their parking lot, there is an opportunity to have Tremont Street be two-way just from their parking lot down to Tremont Street, and then it would be one-way westbound away from Tremont beyond that. It's not shown that way now, but for those who may be interested in saying, oh, the police need to quickly get to Tremont, that is an option we've discussed.
Thanks, Philip. There is a comment in the Q&A where someone is of the opinion that the phase 1 did not make the streets safer for bicyclists. So I just wanted to share that. There's also a question. I'll do the questions, this question here, then I'll go to the verbal Q&A from Nicholas. How will the leftmost through lane between the busway and Center Street going north work for vehicles?
Thanks, Nicholas. Just getting there now. So it's the leftmost through lane between the busway and Center going north. Between the busway and Center going north along Columbus, I assume. So if you are in that leftmost lane, essentially it's an extended, if you will, it's essentially kind of an extended left turn lane for those going into Heath Street. There would be additional design and analysis there. There may also be an opportunity to refine. There is a small parking lot we know at the 223 Center Street area where there is an apartment complex and sort of the Jamaica Me Hungry restaurant. There's still an opportunity to maintain that existing left turn lane there. That's something we're still in the midst of analyzing. It would be very easy to maintain that. But if you are in that leftmost lane, you're either sort of waiting to merge to get into the rightmost lane to continue north, or you're using that as kind of a long queue area to make a northbound left onto Heath Street there to cross the Orange and commuter rail tracks.
Thanks, Philip. And now turning to the folks who've had their hands raised, I'm first going to take Patricia Flaherty and then Kalamu Kieta. So Kyle, can you unmute Patricia? Patricia, you should be able to speak now.
Thank you. I'm Pat Flaherty. I live in Mission Hill and I'm the executive director of Mission Hill Neighborhood Housing Services. And we are the developers of the MBTA and city lots in Roxbury Crossing, the building you referred to where the Eastern Bank is. There's also housing. We also did the senior housing in Roxbury Crossing. And I have 4 questions and I'll try to stay under my 90 seconds. The mid-block crosswalk at Roxbury Crossing Station is critically important. We've been advocating for this for quite some time. I wanted to understand, in addition to it being a raised crosswalk, if there's going to be flashing signals, anything else to make it visually apparent that that's where people will be crossing. Taking my life into my hands at other crosswalks in Mission Hill, I think that's really important. As the direct abutters, we'd also like to understand the redesign that's being put forth for the bus stop on the bridge and how far it's going to extend towards our property. I'd like to understand redesign of that in more detail. Obviously want to understand signal timing, because part of what's wrong in Roxbury Crossing right now is the way the signals are not working. And I'm really concerned about the proposal for one-way Cedar Street prior to the much anticipated Terrace, Tremont, Parker, Gurney Street planning study that we've been waiting for. And I think it might be premature to talk about Cedar Street as a one-way, as it might also solve a lot of Terrace Street issues, but we haven't yet been able to move forward with that study. And I heard that you're meeting with folks related to that, but like to be able to have that study and community process that has been long awaited. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you, Patricia. Much appreciated. I will hit several of these and might toss it to Maya on the city side for Cedar Street to some degree. For the crossing design, I think this would likely be a location that may not qualify as a raised crossing. That's something we can still continue discussing with the city. Just the sheer number of buses and EMS vehicles may make that something that's a little more difficult. But I think overall, your comments about making it very obvious, making it somewhere where it's safe to cross and where drivers are stopping is clearly a focus. I think it may be tough to see at this scale, but we are exploring the opportunity of some sort of curb bump in, bump out, I guess, apologies, to reduce that crossing distance slightly to make it safer.
Maybe something similar to some of the Longwood Avenue crossings where it's really clearly visual that people are crossing and there's lights flashing, et cetera.
Yes, and I think your next two comments all sort of tie together here. One about the bus stop design, one about the traffic signals, and your first comment about the crossing. The crossing, I think, if it was what I would say is like fully signalized, where it's your typical, green, yellow, red, you could do something where you essentially have that signal location coordinated with or talk to the other intersections there. And in some ways that offers some opportunities for safety. The other side of that coin is that when you do that, it may make it tougher when somebody presses a button to cross. You may have to wait a little bit longer to cross. And so there's trade-offs that we're evaluating with BTD signals and with our consultant design team as part of this location for how they're sort of connected and coordinated with the adjacent intersections. What we don't want to happen is certainly to have drivers disregard this, to not see it. As you noted, we want it to be very visually obvious. We also don't want it to be something that pedestrians aren't complying with because they think it's broken because they press a button and something doesn't flash. And so there's some competing issues there. And then I think on your comment on the on the bus design, we're looking at the impacts of how much space is needed for buses to queue in this area. We know there is some parking here. We know that is valuable parking space. We're trying to evaluate if we have kind of a combination of like curbside bus space where buses are actively picking up and dropping off, and then if you have potentially, as shown here, another bus lane adjacent to that where the bus can sort of either wait to transition into the curb to pick up and drop off, and then for buses that are done with passengers boarding and alighting, they pull back out in that lane. Even though it's taking up an additional width of the roadway, we may be able to keep that sort of a shorter space. So I know there's probably a lot of interest in preserving some parking in this area and all the competing interests, both on the westbound side. On the eastbound side, we know there's a daycare and there's a lot of pickup and drop off activities. So we are looking for that, looking to optimize that to the degree possible. What I would also note is, and I failed to relay this earlier, Nate, if you could kind of hover your mouse over that hatched area, kind of on Tremont down there. Yep. We are looking for that to be a potential pickup and drop off space for folks to be able to pick up and drop off, and also for either food trucks or like farmers market delivery vehicles to sort of stage as a space that's a little more dedicated and isn't blocking buses and other vehicles there. Again, your feedback is very welcome here. This is an extremely high demand competing use space for a number of different modes. It is exciting but equally challenging. And then at Cedar Street, you know, we are continuing in those discussions. You know, I think we've heard that you know, it could be one way in either direction. It could be maintained as two-way. We have heard some slightly, you know, differing points of view on this project. Maya, I don't know if you have anything to add from what William is leading here for future coordination.
Yeah, I can speak to that. And Pat, just on a personal note, as a Mission Hill resident myself, I'm also very invested in the outcomes of this study. For anyone that doesn't live on the Hill, the city is currently working on a Terrace Street and Parker Street study. Although their process is a little bit behind us, we've been in really close conversation with that team. I'm actually also working on that project as well. And we're going to be working with them as this is going forward. Like we mentioned, this is a concept design, so we are open to feedback about things like Cedar Street and other decisions that we've shown here. So I just want to show you we're working very closely with that team, and we'll be looking at the results that they find out of their process. They'll actually have a table at our open house on Wednesday if you'd like to come learn more about this project and hear about their process as well as they get it kicked off.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Philip. So I'm going to go to Kalamu. And again, I just remind everyone that 90 seconds, if you could keep your remarks to that. Kyle, can you unmute Kalamu?
Yeah, I want to address first, that response took almost 4 minutes. You're giving us 90 minutes to respond to 2 hours of information. That's a little bit ridiculous. And I do want to point out some other things about the way this meeting's being facilitated that really are not making me as a member of the community feel like this is a meeting for me. Firstly, the chat's disabled. That we can't even communicate with your staff to ask questions prior to this point. We can't communicate with each other. There's seems to be a real hesitance to be transparent with these kinds of things. And I feel like this is one of the biggest issues with these kinds of proposed developments that completely change the way, everything about the way people live in a community with not a single community voice being present at the table. Community stakeholders is the most ambiguous statement on the planet. It could be a corporation, it could be a company, it could be anybody, as long as they are in the community somehow, like the woman who spoke before me, who doesn't sound like she even lives in this community. Frankly, you got a person that's so young that clearly is not from Boston talking about the issues of commuting from Mission Hill. I got hit by a car in that bus because of that bus lane, because someone tried to make a crazy U-turn, because now you can't turn for like 5 or 6 blocks straight. The businesses along where the bus lane are stagnated by the fact that there's no parking. You guys are talking about people double parking and limiting that. If people were double parking, clearly there was a need for parking, and now there isn't any. Today, I witnessed a police officer bus a U-turn through the bus lanes. So it's not just the average person who lives around here. This is a huge problem. I worked in City Hall when this bus lane first started being built. We got calls every single day from dozens and dozens of people wondering, what is this? We never were notified. When the bus lanes became active, we got even more complaints from store owners talking about how their stores are suffering and struggling because people can't park anymore. You guys talked about people not stopping between Jackson and Roxbury Crossing on Columbus Ave. There's nothing there to stop for. The sidewalk is already triple wide on both sides. There's plenty of room for pedestrians. No one walks along that path because there's nothing there. There's 3 parking lots, RCC, and the train across the street. And there's a bike lane on the other side of the street, a walking lane, and a sidewalk.
So I will ask you if you could just, you know, wrap up your comments in the
I know
interest.
I'm trying to, but after
Okay.
2 hours of waiting, I'm sure I'm not the only person that feels like 90 seconds responses are not really good enough to try to actually gain insight from community feedback. I'll leave it at that since you guys are trying to rush me. And I appreciate the time, the effort, but I do want to end by saying this is not a community process. It really feels like a community joke because no one I've talked to, no one that lives in this community with me likes the bus lane. And these are people who take the bus. 7 minutes saved on a commute versus a $20 million installation does not add up. Not when you got crackheads coming in this neighborhood from Melanie Cass Boulevard, stealing stuff from people's yards.
So,
We have
all right.
bigger priorities we should be worried about than bus lanes. And it's not helping safety either.
All right, so thank you for your comments. I do want to actually, Nate, if you could move forward to the how to provide feedback comment. I do want to actually emphasize before I keep going that there are going to be a number of opportunities in addition to tonight. I know this was a presentation heavy meeting, but we're hoping if you are able to come to the Roxbury Community College event on Wednesday, it's more of an open house where you can talk to project staff, folks from the city and the MBTA, and really do a deep dive on that. As well as there's an online forum, and I know we're planning to hold a number of other pop-up events in the community. So I just want to keep it on this slide a little bit so that you make sure that you're on their mailing list so you know of all of these opportunities in the next month to provide additional feedback. I'm going to keep going and note that in the Q&A, there's a question about the slip lane on Malcolm X and whether or not we can get rid of that. That's from Ann Reipenberg.
Thank you. I'd be happy to chat about that. That was actually another point of discussion for, I know some of you may laugh, but for brevity, we removed that from this conversation. If you could roll back a few slides, Nate, even just to one with rocks, actually show the one with David. You can go forward. I say David like I know him. I think that's a great point of technical discussion. I will try to keep this brief. I know a lot of folks in the traffic design, transportation design world, slip lanes are often viewed as an antiquated, unsafe design, and there were iterations of this design that removed them. The reason we've actually kept it is it allows for a shorter crossing across both Malcolm X and the north crosswalk of this intersection at Tremont Street. I appreciate you bringing this up. The proposal that we would have here is currently that slip lane, which is if you're driving westbound on Malcolm X going northbound, there's no traffic signal. Folks can take that at a fairly fast clip. We would be signalizing that intersection and narrowing the amount of pavement that folks can drive through. So right now, I think it's either 22 or 24 feet wide. It's a very, for a single lane, it's a fairly wide distance. We would be looking to narrow that to likely somewhere in the more like 14 to 15 foot range for turning movements there and signalizing it, which allows for a much shorter crossing distance and then makes it safer. Having that right turn lane also allows for some more flexibility at the intersection in terms of design. But that is a great question. And again, if that's something where you have specific feedback or you have other ideas, we've certainly been out here a lot, made a lot of observations, done a lot of analyses, but you know, Maya does live in this neighborhood, so she's out here all the time, but we do welcome your feedback for those who walk and ride and drive this area on a daily basis.
Thanks, Philip. There's another question, and I think we actually neglected to share this tonight about the project schedule. I mean, we did the big project schedule at the beginning, but I think there's some specific questions about construction, et cetera.
Absolutely. I think if you can advance a few more slides, Nate, and our apologies as we made it through the marathon. I think there's one, here we go. So this is our draft concept design presentation. As we have mentioned, really the next 4 to 5 weeks is where we're trying to gather specific feedback on this. We will be at Roxbury Community College on Wednesday. We will be showing up at a number of MBTA stations over the coming weeks, trying to get feedback from those who ride the train and the bus who are along the Southwest corridor. Should be hopefully good weather to get their feedback. Really want to be out in the community, you know, in the Mission Hill, Fort Hill neighborhood in the coming weeks to hear from folks, good, bad, ugly, and different about their specific comments here. And then from that, we will tabulate and aggregate that feedback and sort of translate it with how it relates to the feedback that we've received from the MBTA and City of Boston's technical comments, which we received, you know, significant number, well over 200. And then we will use that to finalize the draft design and communicate that. And then we will be, you know, back out in the fall with additional outreach. But the goal is that this project would be breaking ground next summer. So roughly, you know, probably end of June-ish, early July is when this project is. The goal would be breaking ground for this. So there's still, you know, significant, you know, 12 to 13 months for this additional feedback. We'll be going out again as we continue refining the design.
Thanks, Philip. So I'm going to turn to verbal Q&A again. We'll do Ken Kruckmeyer, then Ann McKinnon. Kyle, can you unmute Ken, please? And just a reminder, Ken, that we are at 90 seconds for comments. Ken, you should be able to speak.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. There you
Okay.
go.
I have a technical question that I'd like to understand. For people who are coming from Dudley on a bus and who want to go up through Mission Hill, in general, they're going to be on a bus that's headed for, coming from Nubian Square, headed for Ruggles. How will they change to the bus that is going to go up Tremont Street, up Mission Hill toward the hospitals? Or if they are on a bus that is going on Columbus Avenue and headed for Ruggles, if they want to get on a bus that goes up Mission Hill, how do they do that, please?
Sure.
Just
So
a quick clarifier, Ken, are you referring, so if folks are traveling from Nubian trying to get into the LMA, how would
Yeah.
they do that?
Yeah.
So there is the 66 bus that travels that route.
But if they're on another bus that is coming down Warren Street and headed for Ruggles,
Mhm.
they're going to need to change. And if they wanted to change where it seems most appropriate, where they would get the, I think it's the 22 that's coming in Tremont, coming in Columbus and turning up Tremont. It seems to me that there are no platforms that allow them to make that change.
if you could go back, Nate, to any slide with a map, maybe even this one actually would be fine for the moment. So in the proposed condition, you know, as Maya said, there is the 66, which certainly goes, you know, you could have a 1-seat ride in westbound from that direction. And the proposed bus network redesign, if you were wanting to change from the 22, say coming from Jackson Square north, that 22 is going to take a left and then stop at Roxbury Crossing, and then you could change to the other routes that also serve Roxbury Crossing from that area. If you are exiting the, I think was your question, if you're coming from the 22 wanting to get like up to Ruggles, or there's a number of different permutations here, and I think most of them are addressed by the sheer number of routes coming from Nubian, or the fact that if you're coming from the 22, you can always transfer from the orange line at Jackson Square up to Ruggles and get there that way, or similar transfers. If you get to Ruggles by bus, foot, car, commuter rail, etc., you can take the orange line. If your bus doesn't exit from Ruggles, which many of them do, you could always take the orange line down to Roxbury Crossing, where you could board the 22. So most, I believe, of the permutations that this offers are covered by the transfer at Roxbury Crossing itself, by the number of routes that travel from Nubian or Ruggles, transfers to the orange line. I believe, and I'm forgetting the exact condition, I apologize off the top of my head. I believe there was a limited case of maybe someone potentially transferring sort of near Prentice, which is why we've pushed for that second crossing at Prentice Street so that you can exit or enter both ends of that platform. Maya, I don't know if you had anything to
That's-
add to that, Maya.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Maya. I was trying to unmute myself and I couldn't do it quickly. So I think Kyle, if you could unmute Anne, please. Anne, you should be able to speak now.
Hello, this is actually Jeffrey Ferris. Thank you. So I have some agreement with the fellow who spoke earlier about this is not a real planning process. It's just something being shoved through. But I do have some questions here. Now, most of what you present here are fabulous improvements, which have absolutely nothing to do with the center bus lane. And you haven't given us any comparison of what a curbside bus lane would do in terms of time improvement. Far cheaper and perhaps making some traffic movements work better. I've never seen an evaluation available to the public of the phase 1 system. The phase 1 told us that, as another person said, there were no bike improvements there. And 2, it relied on 10% of the traffic being diverted off of that route to make it work, which means it's going on to neighborhood streets. Now, in my experience, and often the goal is to keep traffic off of neighborhood streets. And the function of an arterial is to carry that traffic. There's certain streets you want cars to use primarily, and other streets you don't want them to use so much. And you're squeezing these down and going counter to keeping cars off of neighborhood streets. Now, question, you have not given traffic counts, how many cars per hour go through at peak time here. It seems that that's critical. And, you know, I'm all for getting people off of cars, as many of you know me. I'm a big bicycle guy. But as I say, it's kind of crazy squeezing things down so much and going to make impacts in neighborhoods that you're not telling us about here.
Thank you, Jeff.
I can speak briefly to the phase 1 analysis, as I'm quite familiar with that. So we are working on the analysis right now. It's taking a bit longer because we just want to make sure we're really thorough with the data we're using. So that analysis will be published on the City of Boston's Columbus Ave website, hopefully later this week, if not early next week. We'll have that available for folks to read through all of our data sets and analysis and the methodology used. So that will be available. Philip, if you want to answer the rest of the question.
Sure. Thanks, Maya, and thank you, Jeff, for your time and interest. You know, I think you mentioned a center versus side running bus lane. We felt from the immediate feedback we had in terms of travel time benefits on the center bus lane that continuing that both for the benefits that we would receive as well as the continuity for the bus lane in this corridor was a key interest in pushing this forward. And you know, a lot of the costs of this project, when you look at it, you know, whether it's red paint in the center or on the side is very similar, and the improvements to those center stations, we felt like based on the high ridership in this area, there was enough folks that would be, you know, benefiting from those enhanced platforms that was worth the investment. I know there was a comment in the chat that I think you touched on about the bicycle improvements. One of the key differences between this corridor or this phase 2 area and the phase 1 area is that there's just a wider cross section, which allows for some additional improvements on the bicycle side, which in this case there's the southwest corridor, but we're trying to make those crossings more improved. And I think to a comment earlier tonight about sort of separation between the bus and general traffic lane, we're looking at some very sort of tactical improvements that we can make that mitigate how many vehicles are going to abruptly turn left or U-turn across those bus lanes. There's a number of devices out there that are mountable if you absolutely have to drive over them, like for police, EMS, buses, or you know, anyone if you had to, but they certainly slow you down, so they would mitigate some of those crashes. I think Maya touched on the phase one evaluation, and then certainly we've incorporated those traffic counts and cars, you know, information into the analyses that we've conducted, and that information will be posted when we have the final, you know, concept design when that goes live.
Thanks, Philip. And I think that actually just answered another question in the Q&A as well about when will the detailed traffic analysis be shared. And I think you went over that in your presentation as well, that as soon as there's a final design, that's when we'll be able to have more detailed information. There is a variety of questions in the Q&A regarding the Cedar Street proposal to become one-way. Both in terms of more detail on it, and another attendee asking basically how you will arrive at the decision. I think that the quote is, will there be a vote or not? But how will you take, I think, feedback into account along with the rest of the analysis?
I think that's, you know, I'm sure for those who live in this area, that's understandably a really relevant interest. You know, looking at, you know, there is connectivity between Heath Street and Roxbury Crossing and Cedar Street. So we saw that as an opportunity, but we also know that there are that would have changes. So I think we didn't enter this meeting with, you know, a prescribed voting method. I think our main method of discussion, the decision there will be coordinating closely with the associated project. And know they, you know, there's a conduit from that project to many of you and others who are interested. So this is certainly an area to gauge the temperature of this as a decision. And I think, you know, we're gonna use the feedback we get tonight, that we get on Wednesday, that we get through the feedback form, as well as our continued coordination with their project manager and team and community outlet. Maya, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, since it's on the city side as well.
I want to emphasize the continued communication between our two projects, because they are tied together quite intimately. So they will have also opportunities for feedback once their project kicks off in earnest. We'll have opportunities here, and you know, whatever happens on one project will have an impact on the other. So just know that whatever comes out of both of these projects is going to be closely coordinated.
Sorry, guys. So I see in terms of questions, Allison still has her hand raised and she has not had an opportunity to speak yet. Kyle, can you unmute Allison?
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Okay, thank you, Allison.
Good. Okay. A couple comments. I did attend last year's meeting, and I am very interested in seeing the Jackson Square busway become two-way, and whether that is something that could be taken on earlier in this process, I think would be very important, because you didn't mention the buses, the crosstown buses, the 41 and the 14. But delays certainly impact those routes that use the busway. So that would be important. I see a real disconnect, though, in how you're presenting information about buses, because you're often talking about the routes that are going to change with the bus network redesign. But for many of us, we focus on the current routes, and bus network redesign is, frankly, I think, way off in the future because of all the things going on with the lack of drivers and so on. So I think it would be more helpful to be realistic and talk about current routes. And related to that, Roxbury Crossing has just the two routes, the 66 and the 22. that cross in front of the station on Tremont. You mentioned 3. But on the other hand,
So Allison, I will ask you if you could.
oh,
Yeah.
90 seconds. Yes,
Yes,
right.
I'm
Well,
sorry.
I will end there. So I'm just wanted to emphasize the confusion. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. So I think, Philip and Maya, I think it's a question of, can any of the pieces of this be advanced in front of the rest of it? And also just about today's condition versus the future bus network redesign condition. I'll also note really briefly that Maya has posted in the chat information about the Terrace Parker study that we were just talking about a moment ago.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you for your continued involvement with this project. We appreciate it. As far as your first question, I would love if we could go out and start improving that tomorrow. But there are some additional engineering studies that we need. It's a fairly technically complex area as far as it's on top of rail, and there's there's a lot going on. So we have been advancing that very much, as part of this process over the last, I guess, 4 or 5 months since we saw you last. And I think honestly, if you ask me where I've spent the most of my technical time within the MBTA, at least, it's been at that station. Certainly with the city at other intersections, we've focused on a lot, but that's been the biggest like MBTA interdepartmental focus probably has been right there at Jackson Square. So I appreciate your interest, and yes, I did maybe somewhat neglect the other crosstown routes like the 41 and the 14. There are other routes that go through this station, and this project would benefit all of them because they all currently have to enter through the busway from Columbus Avenue. So it is very circuitous. As far as your comment about sort of the disconnect between the current and future routes in this area, I can see why that would be a little bit confusing, or why we want to focus on the present. I think for a project of this magnitude, we're really trying to focus on, if we're going to make these improvements, there's some technical components, especially at Roxbury Crossing for the 22. If it's going to make that left turn from an exclusive bus lane, there's certain things that we need to consider from a traffic signal perspective that need to be implemented now that would be best to do as part of this project. So I can understand, your concern about the routes now. A lot of the routes are not changing to a large degree, and so most of those are not there. I apologize if I've misspoken about which routes serve Roxbury Crossing. I believe it was 3 today, but I can come back and circle back for you on that. And then, you made a comment about just sort of the future of the bus network redesign. We are working very diligently to address operator hiring to the very extent that we can. But I think I've also outlined there's a very strong transit need on this corridor for improved transit priority, whether it's bus network redesign or whether it's what we see today. I think I mentioned the 3 highest ridership routes in the system are all on this corridor. 10,000 folks riding just on this segment, and those routes serve a total of 50,000. And then even just as recently as last week, bus ridership passed the 300,000 average daily mark for the first time since COVID. And those trips represent just about 45% of all MBTA trips on a daily basis. So, just under half of every MBTA trip is made on a bus now. So that's relevant now, and it's also, I think, relevant for the future as we look to this. So thank you for your question and interest.
Thanks, Philip. I'm doing a time check, and I'm just wanting to make sure that we get to all the people who haven't spoken yet. So some of you who have your hands raised, it's because we've already answered a question. So I'm going to go, Chris Vaughn in the Q&A says he thinks the proposal looks wonderful. Will this cause the speed limit to change on Columbus and Tremont given the reduction in travel lanes?
I can speak to this since this is a city jurisdiction. So Columbus and Tremont will stay at the official city posted speed limit, which is 25 miles an hour for all city streets. We've seen excessive speeding on Columbus and Tremont because of its current street design. So we're hoping that with a reduction in travel lanes and other traffic calming measures, that we'll actually see more people obeying the speed limit if this project, once we see these measures in place.
Thanks, Maya. And then there's a comment from Bridget, who says, who's in agreement with Kalamu that does not like the 90 seconds for comments for a 2-hour presentation, which again, sorry about the length of the presentation, but we did have a lot of detail we wanted to cover tonight. I'll just read the remark. Why does it feel like this is an exercise to say you engage the community and it feels like it is already done? The phase 1 said that the traffic was supposed to be slowed. That didn't happen. You also created new traffic policies because no one knows what to do when emergency vehicles need to pass. Roads going from 2 to 1 lane is crazy with idling cars and bus pollution impacting health. We don't want it. So thank you for your comments, Bridget.
And Bridget, thank you for that feedback. We really are hoping to engage and, good, bad, or indifferent. We really do want your feedback on this and welcome you to fill out a feedback form. And if you're able to join us on Wednesday, I think the study that Maya's team is looking at does have some information about speeds dropping on phase 1. And I would just say, I think candidly, we do have a lot of lessons learned from phase 1. There's a lot that we're proud of in terms of transit travel time improvements and new crossings and sidewalks and curb ramps and other infrastructure and the real-time arrival shelter. But we also admit there's lessons learned that we have from that design. And I think there is potentially an opportunity to circle back to make some improvements there. Again, the right of way is not as wide, so there is some limited flexibility, but we really are trying to apply all of the lessons learned we have from that project, as well as other peer agencies that we've been in discussion with around the country and similar environments that have essentially center running bus lanes where it snows. We've tried to make a lot of connections with them and learn from our previous implementations and do the best job that we can. Thank you.
Nate, I'm also going to ask you to poor Nate has to keep changing the slides, but can you forward to the how to provide feedback slide, because it also has the project email address if folks have questions. I want to note that there is a lot of anonymous comments in the Q&A. We will take all comments and we will include that in the meeting summary for this and take it into feedback concern, but I probably won't read them all out loud right now. In the interest of time, I'm going to stick to questions that the team can answer, but we are taking in all the comments in this venue as well as on the feedback form. But I'm trying to find the questions as well. But I think there was a question about if you want to email us, if you have follow-up questions tonight and would like to clarify anything. Just looking for some new ones. Oh, there's a question about the funding for the project. Philip and Maya, I don't know if you can share that.
Sure. This is a project that was identified from the regional planning agency. So there's funding through the MPO for this project, as well as additional funding from the MBTA and the city for that. I think there was an additional question about the approximate cost of this project. I want to say that the cost shifts in real time with any different design change, but currently we foresee the cost of this project in the $25 to $30 million range. That covers, a number of different elements, which I know we've kind of been on repeat for tonight, but that is not $30 million for red paint and stops. It's not $30 million just for green infrastructure, but there's a number of other improvements related to sort of the foundational infrastructure of repaving. This is a roadway that needs to be repaved in many places, regardless of this project. And there's a number of sidewalk panels and curb ramps that need to be repaired regardless. There's out of date and antiquated traffic signal infrastructure that should be repaired regardless of this project. So a significant percentage of these improvements are being made, or sorry, of the cost and the associated improvements, I think would be well deserved to be upgraded and maintained regardless of this. And so in some ways, we're kind of latching on to some degree of this project. There would be disruption and detours or lane reductions during the construction of repaving and traffic signal work, et cetera. And so there's some degree in which we're really trying to kind of strike an efficiency here.
Thanks, Philip. I will also do a time check and note that we are at the 2-hour mark for the meeting. We've been doing questions for about 45 minutes, and we've asked our interpreters to stay a bit. I think we'll continue to go until 8:15. We've heard from everyone, I think at least once, but I know there are some people who had some follow-up questions that we'll take now. So just wanting to give folks a sense of time. And again, if you have comments you'd like to make and you want to keep them in the Q&A, we will take them in as well, even if I don't read them out loud tonight. So I see Nicholas has had his hand raised for a while, and then Anne Greippenberg. So Kyle, if you could unmute Nicholas, please.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
We can. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, of course. So I have a lot of questions. Generally, I really support this project. I think it's great that you guys are doing it. First, I was wondering if it would be possible to raise all crossings of the Southwest Corridor bike path, and for just safety at like minor intersections, like some of the ones that you guys are converting to one way. I think bike detection along the path would be awesome if you could do that at those minor side streets. Let's see. For signal cycles, I think like having all pedestrian like scramble phases at the large intersections kind of encourages people to jaywalk. So if you guys are straying away from that, obviously you're decreasing like travel distances, so it's decreased in terms of the amount of time you need for pedestrian crossings. That's good. And then also just kind of reprogramming the lights in that same vein, like the recently implemented like Ruggles Street bike ped crossing takes a long time when activated to actually change the light. And then also, is there a stop for buses coming from Nubian going to Roxbury or like turning right to go to Ruggles? I think that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Nicholas.
Yep, I can answer the first few. So in regards to the crossings along the Southwest Corridor, so we are working closely with DCR, who is actually embarking on their own planning process of the Southwest Corridor. I believe Amber from DCR is here, so thanks for coming. So we're going to be in coordination with them about what these crossings look like, but we agree, you know, raised crossings are obviously the gold standard in terms of safety. So we'll be looking at all of our options in terms of what our crossings can look like. It's just sometimes we're constrained on the types of vehicles that are traveling those roads and whether or not it's possible for them to actually make it over a raised crossing. In terms of signal timing, yes, absolutely agree. There is a lot of work to be done with the signals in this area. We're working very closely with the BTD signals team on how we can retime these to make traffic flow better, in addition to the providing more crossing time for pedestrians. And then Philip, do you want to take the bus question?
That's a great question, Nicholas, and appreciate the other comments and questions. What hasn't been shown off screen is sort of in this image, kind of near the middle of the word Malcolm and Malcolm X. There would be a proposed stop there for the 15 and the 23 that are turning right to go to Ruggles. So we understand. I think this is actually what, and I believe it was Ken's question earlier. This is what was sort of bouncing around my brain. If you were trying to get to Roxbury Crossing itself, you would be either walking from a location right kind of at Reggie Lewis, or you could continue on the bus and take the right and then get off at the southern end of that Prentice Street crossing. So we do realize that for essentially the folks on the 15 and 23 that are going to Roxbury Crossing itself, that this may be a slightly longer trip. It will have, once you alight the bus, that the bus trip itself will be faster. There will be enhanced priority, but sort of due to all of the permutations of bus network redesign and where you need platforms and where they will fit. And Nate, if you go back to the center image, you can kind of see the curvature of the roadway in both of these here. Well, I guess it was better in the last one. There was some geometric constraints, but you see the road kind of curving. So there was some limits on where we could place those platforms, but hopefully that answers your question, Nicholas, on the, if you were getting off the 15 or 23 destined for Roxbury Crossing. If you're continuing west on a bus route, you would have probably transferred elsewhere along the corridor, maybe at Nubian to a different bus. And then, if you're trying to get to the orange line, you can just stay on the bus and head to Ruggles. So it's really, if you're like going to the farmer's market or going to, somewhere right at Roxbury Crossing, that's kind of a small gap, if you will, that we've done our best to remedy through the design.
Thanks, Philip. So we're going to do Anne and then Andrew, who has his hand raised, and then I'm going to turn it back over to you for final remarks. So Anne, Kyle, can you unmute Anne so she can speak?
Hi, thank you. I'm really happy, just to give context, I live in Roxbury. I'm usually coming from Eggleston Square direction. So I've lived with the first section. As a bus rider, it's great. As a car rider, I think it's much, much better because it's not as chaotic. I like the turn lanes you put in. As a bike rider, it's terrible and I feel less safe, especially when I have to bike up the hill. What do? Do I get hit by a car? Do I get hit by a bus? Do I go on the sidewalk? There's nothing. People have brought this up repeatedly. So the lessons learned, I think, are really encouraging. I love these bike crossings you're adding. And the one thing I would say, I second the raised crosswalk. If you can't do a raised crosswalk, although from what I've heard from folks in Somerville, there's really not a lot of reason you can't. Could you put in rumble strips or something? The drivers are speeding to the light and I've seen multiple crashes at those places. So something other than a flashing light, which drivers ignore, would be helpful. And can you make them wide? The bikes get blocked off and then we all have to wait and maybe we make the light and maybe we don't. The last thing I'm kind of hoping is, can we get facts around some of these things? I keep hearing that, stores are going bankrupt and all these other things. Like I'd love to hear more facts. Like I want the small businesses to succeed, but I also don't want to be killed crossing the road. The fact that there's a 40-second delay now on the first section just is amazing. Like, I think you've done a great job balancing interests, and thank you for prioritizing our safety and being able to take the bus and get places.
Thank you, Anne.
I'll just add to that. And again, thank you for your feedback. As far as the raised crossings, yes, I think there's probably more opportunity than maybe initially we realized that where these could be applied. So we will certainly take your and others' feedback from tonight about where to apply those. Also looking at some of the other tactical treatments that can raise awareness for drivers. As far as the width of the, I think, bicycle and pedestrian crossings along the southwest corridor, there are some constraints. You get fairly close to the bridge abutments along the rail right of way. We will obviously make them as wide as possible, and that's actually a decision we'd had of, should we make this two separate crossings, if you can imagine, like a crossing for cyclists and a crossing for pedestrians, and then you kind of have what we would say technically is like a ramp or a curb reveal in the middle. We've decided to make it a single wider crossing. The trade-off is that you don't kind of have that buffer between folks, but it gives you another 2, maybe 3 feet, maybe even 4 feet of like flat space to cross. So I think based on, similar feedback to yours, we're doing our best to make those crossings, especially along like Heath, Cedar, Lamartine, and Tremont at Roxbury Crossing as wide as possible.
Thanks, Philip. And our last commenter of the night, Andrew Shelburne. Kyle, can you unmute Andrew?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Okay, wow, I have the last words here. I'm generally supportive of everything you guys are doing here. This looks great, and I really happy to see the focus on pedestrian safety and bicycle safety as someone who crosses Columbus. It's quite wide to cross, and anything you can do to narrow pedestrian crossings, helps with safety, and I appreciate that. I'm just trying to, I live on Cedar Street. I'm just trying to understand the impact to Cedar Street with regard to the one-way. It appears that there's a one way from Terrace Street to Columbus. But are you also making a one way on the Roxbury Community College side of Cedar Street? I'm trying to understand the full impact there of that intersection and how traffic would be impacted on, especially on the Roxbury Community College side of Columbus Ave. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll add, and then since Maya lives in this area, I'll let you add on anything you want as well. The change would be from Terrace to Cedar Street, in part to allow a better bicycle connection from that street. We are not proposing any changes on the Cedar Street portion on the east side of Columbus, on the Roxbury Crossing side. The only difference would be that you couldn't continue straight in this proposed condition. You couldn't continue if you wanted to drive from essentially Roxbury Community College to Terrace Street, that direct connection would not be facilitated. You could continue through the neighborhood, essentially on the east side to Heath Street, and then cross and then get up to Terrace Street there. So it would be a slight, additional trip that direct connection wouldn't be there. But the street on the east side of Columbus would not be changing otherwise.
All right, so Philip, I'm going to turn it over to you for closing remarks, but I do want to thank everyone for the thoughtful comments and questions tonight, and they will be reflected in our meeting summary as well, and taken into account with the rest of the feedback received. So Philip.
Thanks, Reagan, and again, thanks to Maya, thanks to Reagan and the consultant team, but first and foremost, thanks to all of you for taking time out. We know you all are busy. We know that many of you live, work, play, learn in this area, and that these could be significant changes to the way your community is designed, and we appreciate that. I really want to hammer home again, all the comments you've received tonight we'll be tabulating. We'll be going back to the other project leads, but we really review tonight as kind of the kickoff of our next phase of outreach, refining this. We really hope that you've heard that we've put a lot of work into this, but that there's still some clear areas in which we want your feedback. I think we've heard a lot about Cedar Street, for example, as an area of interest, and I think understandably so. It would change the vehicular circulation of this area. It would not change the pedestrian or bicycle circulation, but as an example, that's an area in which we do want your feedback, and we hope some of the other changes that we've made from the fall, for example, the bus lanes that are no longer north of Ruggles Street towards Melnea, we hope that's been noted as well. We have tried to be responsive to your feedback where it's accommodated within the project goals. We appreciate your time. We hope to see many of you, if you're interested in learning even more, on Wednesday. We will be out and about in the community in the coming weeks, and you can also follow up with the email address. Nate, if you could go to that last slide one more time, I think that would be good, just so everybody has that in front of them. Nate's been doing yeoman's work, jumping all over. Kyle just posted there we go. So you have information here about how to stay informed and about the feedback form. And again, we really appreciate all of your time and feedback. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.